Hey everyone, it's Maddie.
And V, and today we're going to be going over our favourite books from 2018.
We picked 5 separately and then 3 together.
They are in no particular order, and we also limited ourselves to not picking rereads because otherwise they would have just overtaken the whole list, so they are new to us books.
We'll start with our joint picks, and the first one is I've Lost My Way by Gail Forman.
This story is told so complexly. It's got now and then narratives, it's through 3 different characters, and they both have first person and third person narration.
The plot itself was really gorgeous, of all of these people that had lost their way with their lives, finding each other and finding purpose again, and the connections that they made over a 24-hour period was so lovely. It managed to tick a lot of my boxes in terms of buzzwords, and also it was a surprise read for us because we saw it one day in one of our supermarkets and decided to pick it up even though we hadn't really had much luck with Gail Forman before. And so this was kind of like the hidden gem of the year.
In some ways it feels like she's just been rewriting that same idea of connection over a short amount of time, and with I've Lost My Way she really struck a chord with it. It's definitely her best book yet. Our next book is Your Turn to Die by Sue Woolman.
A favourite books of the year video would not be complete without one of Sue Woolman's thrillers because they've managed to astound us every year that we've read them. It's a story about 3 friends going back to a family holiday that they do every single year, but they feel slightly too old for it this time. A new girl gets introduced into their group to shake things up, and they end up playing this game where they write predictions of what they think is going to happen, and it turns out that death is on the cards.
They're also trying to solve an old mystery of the town, so it's very spooky and atmospheric, and I think a little bit more slow-paced than her other ones, but the payoff is totally worth it.
Sue Woolman's writing is partly why I love these thrillers. They don't feel forgettable because she chooses such interesting details to focus on, and it's something that I really admire about her work. And our last joint pick is Clean by Juno Dawson, and this is one that we were kind of wary of because I'd heard so much hype about it beforehand, and I wondered if it would live up to it. And I'd read every other Juno Dawson book before this, and I didn't really think that I'd found the one yet, but this is definitely it.
Clean is the story of Lexi, who is admitted into a rehabilitation centre. It's about the connections she makes and how she can grow as a person, but it's realistic. It shows the bounce back and how things don't just solve themselves immediately. We consumed this book mostly through listening to it, and it got to a point where we thought the story was wrapping up, and then we realised we still had like 30% left to go. So it really follows Lexi throughout her whole journey.
We also really appreciated the backstory that you get into Lexi and why she is the way she is. I think it's so well reasoned, and also it's not just info dumped in one section of the story, it's something that you learn as you read.
Lexi is a very individual character. I don't think I've read about anyone like her. Her voice is unique, and so many of the scenes I still remember now.
And I think this is just a lesson in following your passion projects because it really shines through in the reading.
Now we're moving on to our individual picks. My first one is Hole in the Middle by Kendra Fortmeyer, and I read the first chapter of this in a trial chapter. It took me an unforgivably long time to actually get around to reading the whole book because I loved it. There were definitely decisions that the characters made and that the author made in telling the story that at the time of reading it I was like, is this really going the way that I want it to go? But honestly, once I finished I thought it was perfect. So this is the story of a girl who has a literal hole in her chest, and then she's contacted by her doctors about a boy who has a lump on his chest, and it seems to fit the size of the hole. So it's about the medical condition, but it's also about the media storm of how the world just starts shipping these 2 people together when they don't really know each other. So they're getting to know each other and also like wondering whether they need a second piece or if they're like happy with this missing thing.
So for me, I have my reintroduction to Rick Riordan after kind of leaving him alone for a significant amount of time, and that's Trials of Apollo, The Hidden Oracle. Essentially, I was just really off track with his books, and I knew that this one was returning to Greek gods where I felt most comfortable. So I thought if I'm going to go back in, it will be with this book, and oh my gosh, am I pleased that I did, because Apollo's character was just so funny. This was an odd mix of nostalgic and new for me. I forgot how much I loved Rick Riordan's writing style. I laughed so many times throughout it, and I don't know how he still manages to do it after I've read like 10 plus books from him. I love in these books that he keeps picking different demigods to focus on, so you're not seeing repeats of like Athena children or Poseidon children. This has a child of Demeter, and that's a really fun mix with Apollo. Yeah, it was just hijinks and exactly what I expected, but in an entirely good and kind of unexpected way.
Next, I have a book that literally took my breath away, and that is The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Danforth. I picked this up from a library and I read like 150 pages about 2 or 3 years ago, and then I didn't really get into it. I read it over the course of about 2 weeks, and I was reading it in my breaks whilst I was at work. It literally pained me to go back to work every time because I just wanted to keep reading. It's absolutely depressingly sad in places and so real. Like, it really doesn't shy away from the horrible moments, but it's also really hopeful and nice. And I think there were far more moments outside of the actual conversion camp therapy situation. You really see, like, pre all of that, her life before, and then the conversion camp bit is like only the next half. I just thought this story was absolutely beautiful. I loved every single one of the characters, and I just wish there had been like 50 pages more, because it's kind of an unsatisfactory ending. You have to believe for yourself whatever you want to happen next.
Next, I have the entire Super Awkward Trilogy by Beth Jarrett. This filled the hole that Geek Girl had left in my heart, as this was the first year in so many years that there wasn't a new Geek Girl book to read. And I just absolutely loved the vibe of this one. I was pleased that I got to binge the whole series and stay with Bella and her family and her friends for a lot longer than just one book. I really enjoyed this first book, but I think my favourite is definitely the third, because by then Bella feels a bit more comfortable in her personality. But I would definitely recommend this series if you like Geek Girl, if you like other kind of comedy YA books like that cross the boundary between middle grade and YA.
My next pick is After the Fire by Will Hill. Again, it was one of those ones where I felt annoyed whenever I had to put it down, because the storytelling is so enticing. It's about a girl who is part of a cult, and it opens once this cult has literally been burned down and she's in the hospital and the police are talking to her about the events. So you're teased with what's happened and you keep being pulled back to the investigation, which really keeps you longing to know exactly what happened and how things ended with this huge fire. And because you have the distance of Moonbeam being out of the cult, you get more of a character assassination of the leader of the cult. So you get like the biased view of why it was good to be in the cult, but then you also start to see like underneath.
My next pick is another thriller. It's one that Bea read ages ago, and I've read a lot from this author, but this was one that I hadn't, and that's The Lost and the Found by Kat Clark. This is all about Faith, whose older sister Laurel was kidnapped when she was really young, and they haven't seen her in about 13 years, and the book starts when Laurel returns to the family. This is just such a chilling concept to me, because I felt like when I was reading it, it was like a 3-part documentary drama or something. I could just see it in my head, like, so clearly visually. The twists in this were really great and unexpected for me. I liked the relationship between Laurel and Faith and like all of the things that they had to talk about in her absence. It like gives you a very specific feeling of like something's going to go terribly wrong and I don't want it to, but I can just see it coming. Even though it's quite long, I think the length is really well justified because the pacing was just excellent for me. And I knew probably from about 50 pages in that it was going to be a 5-star read.
My fourth pick is The Last Boy and Girl in the World by Siobhan Vivian, and this was one of the first books I read this year and I still think about it now. To me, this is the epitome of the perfect contemporary. It's equal parts happy and sad, just like a lot of the other contemporaries I've mentioned on this list. It's got a beautifully unique concept. I just love the context of a town like coming together but also splitting apart after this terrible like weather tragedy. It's about Keely dealing with her friends and also with a boyfriend whilst all of this trauma at home and also just in her community is going down. It's very much a community book in that way. It's like Gilmore Girls if there was a natural disaster. The romance is a huge part of it, but more than anything the romance serves as character development for Keely, and I love a story where a character really grows, but not in obvious ways, just where it's like, oh, you are a better person at the end of this, or you at least understand your situation more. It's also my favourite of Siobhan's books, and I think it's highly, highly underrated.
So even though we said that there was no order to this list, this book stands out as my favourite of the year because I had such a blast reading it, but I read it in 50-page chunks to really savour it. Not because it was slow-paced, but just because I wanted it to last forever. And that's This Adventure Ends by Emma Mills. This is all about Sloane, who's moved to a new town with her parents. Her dad is a famous writer who is struggling to write his next book, and so Sloane introduces him to this TV show that she's watching, and he starts to write fan fiction about the main characters, and that reinvigorates him about writing. So fan fiction is a very big part of this story, but on the flip side there's also the friendships that she has with all of the new kids that she's meeting, and she blends in with them very well, but she's very self-depreciating about her own value in a friendship group. She feels kind of lonely, like her parents were her best friends before this, and so to be part of this big group and be so loved so immediately by these people kind of throws her off a little bit. Oh, just everyone was great, like literally every single named character in this was amazing and I want them to be my friends. There's a set of twins that kind of lead the friendship group and they're the most impactful on Sloane's life. She is falling in love with the brother and she kind of idolises the sister, but the romance is just so cute because they like both know they're interested in each other but they never communicate it, and so all of their conversations are goofy because they end up saying the wrong things or like acting strangely around each other, and I don't find that at all frustrating because it's done in like the cutest way possible. So this managed to hit a lot of emotions for me. It made me laugh, it made me cry, which I have always said are the two ingredients to a 5-star read for me, because if you can get that range of emotion in one book then it's a great feat.
My final pick is Skye in the Deep by Adrienne Young, and this is a Viking fantasy, and I read this like in the first quarter of the year. I really loved it. Like, fantasy, I think for me has to have like there's a boundary of like what's good, what's just entertaining, and then what is memorable. And Skye in the Deep for me is truly memorable because it's about family connections at its heart. I would have loved this to be like a sprawling series, but I think the fact that it's a standalone, I think there is going to be a companion novel, but the fact that you can read it as a standalone is also what makes it so incredibly good. I love the politics of it and the backstories and just the histories of the different Viking clans. And then it does dabble in romance and friendship based things as well, but as I said, the key is family. It's between a brother and a sister, which you don't often see. It was thrilling and adventurous. Like, every scene felt like it was part of a movie. So I will be following this author for the rest of her career.
Next, I have The Secret Deep by Lindsay Galvin, and this was such an interesting reading experience for me because it was on a day where B was working a lot later than I was, and so I decided to go over to the Waterstones and just browse some books. And then I saw this one, and you can probably guess why I picked it up because of this gorgeous cover. It was quite small. I only had like an hour and a half to sit there and browse, but I decided I was just going to read the whole book. It's just such a great story. I think I'd put it in the same category as The Girl of Ink and Stars and A Shiver of Snow and Sky, in that it's a really compact story but there's a lot to it. It's all about Asta and her sister Poppy, who are going to live with their aunt, who is part of this island that has a lot of research going into medical conditions and living longer. And then another character is a boy called Sam, who is on the plane with these girls as they're travelling to this island, and he connects with them for a little bit. And then something happens that separates the sisters and the boy. It gets a bit crazy from there, a little bit weird, and that's where The Secret Deep comes in, because some of these experiments are about breathing underwater and genetic mutations, and so Asta gets to discover this whole like underwater world and also what's potentially going wrong with these experiments. And I think that's all I can say without spoiling the book. So it was different for me. I really liked the sister relationship in it, and it's a reading experience that I'll definitely remember for a long time.
Those are our favourite books of 2018, and I think some of my favourite books overall.
Next year is going to be the first year where we don't have any university reading lists, and so we get to be solely in control of our reading for the first time in about 5 years. So that is going to be exciting and different, and you might have noticed, as B said, we read a lot less than we did in previous years, and I think that's just going to be a running theme now that we have a full-time job and less time to dedicate to reading. So we're definitely going to put more effort into finding books that we love and spending time on things that we know we'll enjoy.
If you have any recommendations for us based on any of the books that we mentioned today, please let us know in the comments, and also tell us what some of your favourite books of 2018 were.
We make bookish and writing videos every week, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already.
And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MaddieandB, and those links are always in the description.
We'll see you next time.